So that actually brings me to my next question. It was like a perfect segue. So, our research has found that partners and ex partners will often leverage child welfare and other legal systems in attempts to harm as well as exert power and control over survivors and their children. So, how can advocates, you already named some ways that advocates can really support survivors, but what are some additional ways that, what does it kind of look like, or what should an advocate have in mind when a survivor is involved in a child welfare system or one of these other legal systems and is using substances? How can advocates really help advocate for that survivor and their children?
And it's really challenging, I think, for advocates to, and I think they have to recognize the challenges that they're facing here, because a lot of times we're the ones in the room that aren't singing the same song as everybody else, so it feels like a lot of times that you're sort of up against an army, and you're David against Goliath to some extent, with along with the survivor. So I think that, thinking about those things and prepping themselves personally to deal with those things and to manage those things emotionally for themselves is good, because, it can be really challenging feeling, whether you're there with the survivor or you're in some of these meetings, speaking in general terms about the challenges that survivors face. I think that helping those partners understand the dynamics of domestic violence, the coercive control pattern of perpetrators, us really paying attention to that piece of it. I think sometimes in in the world today, we get really caught up in domestic violence from the perspective of physical violence. And I think we have to have a lot more conversations around the domestic violence or intimate partner violence. I think we should really work on changing the term and not saying domestic violence as much as intimate partner violence sometimes, because I think it brings on a whole different definition, that domestic violence can mean a real broad thing. But when we're talking about perpetrators that are utilizing systems to control the survivor or manipulating things around them to keep control over that survivor, that's it's a much more serious thing, I guess. I was going to say diabolical, feels diabolical sometimes. Some of the things that perpetrators can do, and the systems seem to buy into them very quickly, which can take us back, I guess, to a lot of reasons, the isms and phobias, and the institutionalization of those things, and how they impact how the system responds. So I think perpetrators have that advantage, and they're able to present well, and they're able to, the system, for instance, in the child welfare arena, really puts a lot of the responsibility of the safety of the children on the mother. So being able to point out things that she is doing that may be unsafe can be really easy, especially if they're struggling with mental health or substance misuse. These are things that they can attack very quickly, and they're going to get the support of the helpers, the system, and sometimes the judges and the case managers and caseworkers, and everybody in those seats are going to be like, well, yeah, that's not a good behavior if you're trying to keep kids safe. And maybe it's not, but we have to help that system see things in context and see also the pattern of the perpetrator and the validity of maybe some of the statements that they make. And they're in a position to be able to do it very well, and that is a whole piece of that will, that power and control will, that I think we have to pay attention to, and we have to help our partners understand and see it through that lens of somebody that is demonstrated a pattern of coercive control over the course of this relationship. And for that reason, we really have to look at other collateral evidence of whatever accusation maybe being used to manipulate the system into thinking that this survivor is the overall problem. Being able to remove some of those things and look at, sometimes you have to really sit and remove the substance abuse and the mental health issues, or those kind of issues, and say, let's just look at the coercive control right now. And then we'll overlay these other things with that part of the relationship, those things that are going on. Looking at the substance use in the context of that can change how we view the survivor's experience with it, and sometimes the safety of the children or the safety of themselves. It helps us understand it better. So I think that's kind of our big job as advocates, is to be able to, provide that perspective, if even in general terms, in a room full of helpers who may not exactly have the expertise around this particular issue. But how can we teach that and then help partner with expertise so we can have a more inclusive approach to all these issues and think about it? I know we still struggle a lot with that, with substance abuse cases in our area. If there was domestic violence also, we're really still seeing that push to focus on the substance misuse and not the violence. And I think that's just a big mistake. Because I really see the substance misuse more of the symptom to the domestic violence. So at least we have to take time to determine which is, like, if sometimes the substance misuse needs to be addressed first, but we have to take the time to figure out what's the best and to look at the two things together, because the perpetrator is going to use all of that, as far as the survivor is concerned, to help continue to throw roadblocks in front of her ability to get through this case, the criminal case, the dependency case, the family law case, whatever it is. It's a continued pattern. And so many times these ladies, I think that people don't really realize, sometimes they're caught in years of court case stuff. Years. It's exhausting. And the strain that puts on a person, sometimes the sheer feeling of defeat that they have through that process it's heartbreaking. Being able to help people understand that challenge and see it through their eyes, even just a little bit, is so really important.
And how an advocate might be the only person in that room who really brings that DV lens, who understands the substance use as part of just the within the context of the violence, right? It's just like hyper focused on one and ignoring the other. And that when all of these systems are so incredibly frightening and exhausting, and especially when there is someone literally trying to use the system against a survivor,
Right.
the importance of an advocate to really advocate and support, right? Kind of like you were saying, those being able to be in both worlds and support survivors so that they aren't alone facing this. So they have someone to kind of carry and confront the load with them. And then
Right.
also being in those rooms and advocating on behalf of survivors and their children.